No, I mean, because when you're thinking of victims of this awful world, you think of Michelle Obama and how terrible we've all been to her. This woman is a one-woman destitution derby. Every time we check in on her at her podcast, she is feeling sorry for herself. She is criticizing Barack Obama or this country. She never has a positive word to say about.
Just came off a junket. I think you remember, Megyn. She went to Berlin. A private leftist group asked her to speak, and it was for $750,000 for 60 minutes. It worked out to about $12,000 a minute. And it was very funny about her because I only bring this up because in that interview, I think you remember, she was making fun of capitalism. She said it's supposed to trickle down, but it doesn't even trickle down now. And I'm thinking, well, you just made $12,500 a minute. And you know what, Michelle? You were asked to speak on DEI, but you didn't speak on E. You only spoke on D.
What if everything you thought about Michelle Obama was a carefully built illusion? From Netflix deals to designer outrage, today we peel back the mask and what we found might just shatter America's favorite fairy tale. Stay tuned, because once this roast begins, there's no going back. Under the harsh glare of media scrutiny and beneath the flawless veneer of scripted speeches, the once celebrated image of Michelle Obama began to fracture, exposing a carefully engineered public figure whose brand was built as much on curation as on charisma. What was long protected under layers of praise, photo ops, and best-selling memoirs suddenly looked vulnerable. Megyn Kelly and Victor Davis Hanson, unburdened by political politeness, took center stage and unleashed a bold, unflinching critique that tore through the gloss like a blade. Their words weren't delivered with hesitation or subtlety. They were aimed directly at the myth itself, myth so carefully nurtured by mainstream media and cultural elites that it had become immune to the kind of criticism any other public figure would regularly face. They approached the topic like demolition experts dismantling a monument, brick by polished brick. What they exposed wasn't scandal in the traditional sense, but rather the deeper contradictions that lay beneath Michelle's rise from First Lady to global lifestyle icon. The Michelle Obama the world had come to admire, a poised, articulate, seemingly relatable mother of two with Ivy League credentials and a heartwarming backstory wasn't necessarily a lie, but, they argued, it was far from the whole truth. That image had been refined over years of calculated media appearances, speechwriting teams, wardrobe strategists, and a marketing machine more befitting a Fortune 500 company than a former First Lady. Kelly and Hanson didn't just question her credentials, they questioned the entire apparatus that made her untouchable. From late-night TV cameos to her polished podcast presence, from tear-filled interviews to motivational Michelle had built an empire not on governance, but on presentation. And while that's not a crime in itself, the duo suggested, it became a problem when it was sold to the public as authenticity. The flaw, they said, wasn't just in Michelle, it was in how the culture around her had been trained to applaud branding as bravery. They zeroed in on her tendency to speak from a place of pain, often emphasizing personal anecdotes about racism, anxiety, or insecurity while simultaneously occupying one of the most privileged spaces on the planet. This wasn't to say that her experiences were invalid or that she hadn't faced hardship, but to suggest that her continued framing of herself as an outsider, even after 8 years in the White House, was beginning to wear thin. In a world where true oppression is widespread and untelevised, the constant return to her own discomforts, while seated in a custom chair during a Netflix special, came across to some as toned up. Even more glaring, according to Hanson, was the reverence the media granted her, a reverence that shielded her from the standard accountability applied to others in political discourse. Michelle Obama, they said, was never treated as a political operative, even when engaging in clear political messaging. Her criticisms of the opposing party were accepted as heartfelt wisdom, not ideological positioning. Her initiatives, no matter how performative or ineffective, were championed as revolutionary. Her absences from key debates were excused as tasteful neutrality. She was, in many ways, above reproach. And that, Kelly insisted, was precisely the problem. They also explored the paradox of Michelle's relationship with fame. She has often described her public role as a reluctant one, that she never sought the spotlight, that her fame is a burden. And yet, the evidence of her active participation in sustaining it says otherwise. From stadium book tours to front-page magazine features, from talk show circuits to carefully curated documentaries, Michelle has not just accepted attention, she has mastered it. Kelly argued that this dual messaging of rejection and embrace was not just disingenuous but strategically manipulative. It allowed her to maintain the moral high ground, while benefiting from the machinery of celebrity. The takedown wasn't about scandal in the traditional sense. There were no legal accusations, no tapes, no betrayals. It was about the subtle and slow erosion of public trust when figures present one version of themselves to the world while living another behind the scenes. Hanson went further, suggesting that Michelle's greatest achievement was not in public health, education, or politics, but in the commercialization of vulnerability. She had found a way to sell pain, to monetize hardship, to turn introspection into influence. And while that has become common among public figures, when combined with the level of adoration Michelle receives, it creates a dangerous standard where sincerity is assumed, never questioned, and where criticism is silenced under accusations of sexism or racism. What Kelly and Hanson offered was not necessarily new, but it was rare in its frankness. Most media outlets would never dare touch the subject, afraid of backlash or social media storm. But they pulled back the curtain anyway. They scrutinized the applause lines. They dissected the metaphors. They questioned the halo. And by the end of it, they weren't just poking holes in a brand, they were highlighting what happens when we mistake branding for character and inspiration for integrity. The illusion of Michelle Obama as untouchable did not just fall, it shattered, and in its place, the public was left to consider whether we had been sold a symbol rather than shown a leader. The roast wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. It was a challenge to the audience, a push to think critically, to reevaluate the difference between public service and personal elevation, between performance and principle, because in the end, if the most admired woman in American politics can't face the same questions we pose to others, then maybe the real issue isn't Michelle at all. Maybe it's us and our willingness to praise the surface while ignoring what lies beneath.
To right that ship. Enter Michelle Obama. All the speculation about whether Biden can make it. And he got lost even at the last event. He was wandering around on the stage when he made his January 6th remarks. Jill Biden had to save him. Enter Michelle Obama, who sits down on this popular podcast, though I've never heard of it, but apparently it's popular, with this guy. She has nothing to promote. She has no book. She has no event. So that means she called them and said, I have something to say. And she very clearly has something to say.
Tucker or one, they say these things that aren't true, whether it's Michelle Obama talking about black lives being indiscriminately almost daily killed on the street, or Andrew Cuomo with the worst record about the virus and then bragging as if it was the best, because there is no media as we used to know it. NBC, ABC, the network news, CNN, MSNBC, PBS, NPR, they're fused with the progressive movement in general and the Democratic Party.
If you are enjoying this video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Michelle Obama, once praised for turning White House fashion into a statement, now finds her legacy questioned. Not for courage, but for cashing in on book deals and image control. Megyn Kelly and Victor Davis Hanson took aim at this polished figure of public relations and turned the spotlight into a stage for satire. Beneath the magazine covers, dance segments, and picture-perfect outrage, they claimed, lies a remarkably inflated political presence. And they did not ease into the criticism. They opened with a verbal firestorm that lit the carefully managed myth on fire.
Which was diversity and inclusion. But why didn't you put equity in there? Because it's pretty unequal. For you to get $12,500, which is more than most people in the world make an entire year, you made in a minute. And so they have this bad habit, the Obamas, that every time there's a social justice question, whether it was George Floyd or economic downturn, they appear. Sometimes they appear from Kalorama, sometimes from Martha's Vineyard, sometimes from the new Hawaii mansion, sometimes from their old Chicago digs. But they come out and they lecture the country on its illiberal tendencies.
Megyn Kelly wasted no time tearing off the label of untouchable icon. She jumped straight into questioning the logic that popularity somehow equals authority. Just because Michelle Obama delivers speeches in style does not mean she is shaping policy. It means she is shaping a brand. For years, Michelle has polished her public image like a product, smiling for cameras while avoiding real accountability. She has been marketed as a symbol of elegance and intellect, but underneath the polish is a voice that often sounds more bitter than inspirational. Her appearance on Jay Shetty's podcast only added fuel, where she claimed her fears were not personal but about the streets. About immigration statements made while riding in a 4-car motorcade. Victor Davis Hanson continued the roast. spotlighting what he called Michelle's constant posture as a victim. She lived in the White House like royalty, left with an empire, and yet still manages to frame herself as oppressed. At some point, using the struggle narrative while releasing Netflix specials starts to feel more insulting than empowering. Even as she admitted her daughters were relatively safe, Michelle doubled down on expressing fear, despite the fact that her family is shielded by elite security and fame. It painted a picture of someone who speaks as if still under threat while existing far above the average American's reality. Megyn Kelly went after the glaring inconsistencies in Michelle's carefully crafted image. For someone who says she dislikes politics, Michelle never hesitates to use political talking points like weapons. From a luxurious $12 million estate, she presents herself as just another woman from the block, of contradictions so stark. It feels like watching a goddess pretending to be a commoner. The media, according to Megyn, laps it up without question. She pointed to quotes that sounded so exaggerated, they seemed like satire but they were real. In her words, Michelle often sounds more discontented than her critics ever portray her. Then came what Victor described as the sleight of hand, Michelle's transformation from First Lady to cultural idol. He called out the irony of someone who preached unity while dismissing differing views with academic arrogance. If there were medals for self-righteousness, Michelle would top the podium. She could take a simple story about vegetables and turn it into a national saga. While students choked down flavorless tofu nuggets in the name of health, Michelle was likely enjoying a private chef's best offerings. Her nutrition campaign, Victor said, felt more like performance than progress, just well-staged moral grandstanding. Michelle's own words on Barack revealed the ongoing PR machine. She praised him in poetic tones, claiming he was the only one who could heal the earth. But when the conversation turned to personal matters, her tone remained just as dramatic. Victor was quick to highlight how Michelle's supposed advocacy for public education fell apart when it came to her own children, who attended elite private schools. And when debates arose over what was being taught in public schools, Michelle stayed silent, disappearing exactly when many expected her to speak up. Advocacy, it seemed, at a deadline. The release of her next interview or cover story, Megyn pointed out Michelle's endless need to be seen, without ever taking responsibility for the division her words sometimes sparked. Victor took on the myth of her legacy, arguing that while she is praised as a once-in-a-generation figure, the real legacy is shallow viral quotes and coffee table memoirs that go unread. Her true skill, he said, is crafting applause-worthy moments, not creating lasting change. Perfectly matched outfits with social messaging. Flawless, but actual impact still up for debate. The Obamas, Megyn added, have a habit of stepping into the national conversation only when a spotlight is already shining. Whether it is racial injustice or economic downturn, their statements tend to come from luxury destinations, vineyard homes, Hawaiian estates, or elegant retreats, yet they lecture America as if they are still in the trenches. Megyn then examined Michelle's ongoing narrative of reluctant fame. She often says she never wanted the spotlight, yet continues to sign checks, launch tours, and produce more content. Her retirement from public life has lasted longer than most political careers and has been more calculated than a halftime show. Victor called it what it was, a stealth campaign for influence, where Michelle remains ever-present without running for office. Her popularity, he said, is not earned through courage but crafted through emotional storytelling, equal parts vulnerability and ego, stirred with historical spin. Her interview with Dr. Sharon Malone, wife of Eric Holder, was telling. Two women married to powerful men, seemingly frustrated by not being the biggest stars in their households. Michelle, in this light, becomes less of a leader and more of a lifestyle brand. Somewhere along the way, people stopped asking, what exactly has she done? Victor hammered the point home. Michelle speaks endlessly about morality, about national decency, but never critiques issues within her own political camp. Her calls to speak truth to power seem conveniently one-sided. The selective outrage, he argued, is thick enough to sell in bottles. Megyn also criticized how any scrutiny of Michelle is instantly labeled as hate, and any challenge to her image is portrayed as an attack. The media surrounds her with such protection that even the most bland, overused phrases draw applause. Michelle is the only public figure who can get a standing ovation for matching her heels with a politically controversial color. Victor ended with a heavy blow. The real scandal was not Michelle herself, but the political shielding around the Obama era, referencing the Russian collusion narrative. He said President Obama tried to discredit an incoming president using intelligence agencies, a power play that made Watergate look tame. In that context, the myth-building around Michelle is not just PR, it is political theater at its most polished. Victor gave it all away with one sweeping judgment. Michelle Obama may go down in history as the most over-celebrated underachiever in modern politics. She stepped into the White House full of potential and stepped out with a string of brand deals, a podcast, and a never-ending narrative of grievance. While real leaders were locked in policy battles, she was penning poetic reflections and delivering TED-style monologues about being too famous to shop at Target. Megyn Kelly's final blow was thunderous. This was not just satire, it was surgical. Together, she and Victor dismantled Michelle's legend piece by piece, every polished smile, every crafted speech. And yet, there is still more to unpack. When your influence is stitched together by contradictions, there is always another layer to expose, another standing ovation to question, another glamorized moment to strip down. As the critique turned sharp, deeper questions emerged. Was the intelligence community's report skewed to paint Trump as a Russian asset? Was Barack Obama fed cherry-picked assessments, or did he request them? These questions echoed beneath the surface, revealing a broader political playbook. Meanwhile, Megyn and Victor sharpened their focus. Michelle's real legacy was not in leading the nation, but in perfecting the art of self-promotion. She did not retreat from fame, she redefined how to chase it with elegance. Each time the public's attention drifted, she returned with another emotionally charged interview, another wistful memory, another socially loaded comment, keeping herself afloat above criticism, like a carefully released balloon of curated outrage. Her speeches are not about delivering truth, they are about becoming memes. Somehow, that strategy worked. She turned discomfort into a brand, and victimhood into a full-fledged marketing plan. Victor dug even deeper, calling out the illusion of sacrifice Michelle often projected. Her time in the White House, she portrayed, was a burden she nobly carried, like she was dragged into privilege against her will. The reality: she enjoyed private jets, high-end fashion, and unrivaled global access. But if you listened to her memoir tour, you would think she spent 8 years behind bars rather than in one of the world's most powerful positions. Then came the grand reveal. Megyn exposed the contradiction of authenticity. Michelle, who is polished to perfection, somehow still presents herself as real. But her brand of relatability is like a reality TV show, scripted, staged, and managed by an entire crew. It is a performance wearing a $4,000 jacket and calling it struggle.
Never has a positive word to say about anything. And the latest example was when she went on this other guy's podcast, Jay Shetty. She goes and sits down with him, and he asks her, what are you afraid of? And she starts off by saying, well, it's not, my fears aren't for me. You know, I think about the streets. My fears aren't for me.
Well, in this current climate for me, it's, what's happening to immigrants.
I mean, I travel in a...
What the public rarely sees is the fine print. Michelle has often said that White House life was not all free. Sure, housing and staff were covered, but food, some travel, and the extras, they came with a price. Still, this detail pales in comparison to the life she describes now. I am in therapy, she says. I am 60, I have raised my girls, and now, for the first time, my choices are mine. It is a sentiment that tugs at the heartstrings, but for critics, it sounds more like a carefully placed soundbite than a genuine revelation. Victor wrapped it all with a final blow. Michelle's impact is broad, but it barely scratches the surface. Her speeches may sound poetic, but they lack substance. Her books may be thick, but they are quickly forgotten. Her fame is undeniable, yet her principles seem to stop wherever political discomfort begins. She is a symbol without a cause, a headline without real legacy. And so, the curtains close not on a transformative leader but on a flawlessly directed act. Michelle Obama will always have admirers, always gather applause, and always find new ways to present herself as misunderstood. But what she may never secure is the one thing that defines a public figure's worth: a legacy built on tangible results. As Megyn and Victor walked off the stage, the damage had been done. The myth was not just dented, it was dismantled. The spotlight still follows Michelle, but now it exposes the flaws beneath the glow. What remains is not a leader but a brand, highly curated, widely adored, and hollow at its core. That emptiness, it is not just symbolic. It is the sound of the truth finally catching up.